I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is Under the Dome. One of the key planks of the Alberta Fair Deal plan is the notion of a provincial police force. The idea is that with a provincial police force, the provincial government would have more control over policing in the province and could ultimately offer better service. On the downside, it's predicted that the APP would cost the government about $750 million per year on top of about $350 million in startup costs. Now, the RCMP is very popular here in Alberta, and a lot of municipalities don't want to see it go. So what are the issues with bringing in a provincial police force to get rid of the RCMP? Today on Under the Dome, I talked to a couple of people who address some of those issues. My guest is Kevin Halwa. He's a regional director with the National Police Federation. Kevin, thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Now, the NPF is on a bit of a roadshow in Alberta right now, hosting some town halls in relation to the proposal by the Alberta government to implement a provincial police force. What's the motive behind these town halls?
We want to host these engagement sessions to conduct a series of facts-based and provide some clear information and hear directly from Albertans on their interests and questions and concerns on this topic. Once we're done all those engagement sessions, we will prepare a short report summarizing what we've heard and share it with the government. And what we want to do is hold the government accountable to the Albertans and the things that they've voiced.
Now, as I understand it, you're down in southern Alberta now after doing a swing through northern Alberta. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on the kind of things that you heard in communities like Fort McMurray or Strathcona County. Are there some specific concerns that people are raising? What are you hearing from average Albertans?
Well, from the people we've heard, Dave, and it doesn't matter where we were, a few things ring loud and clear and repetitively is that they're struggling for an answer as to why the provincial government seems to think this is a good idea. They also have questions about the cost and where that excess money is going to come from. And then, once we talk with them a little bit more, they leave even having more questions about, the training and where the bodies are going to come from and those sort of things. And they're left, or they've explained to us anyway, that they're really feeling like they're not being listened to by their government, and it's causing them great concerns.
Yeah, and I know that there are some mayors in Alberta who are opposed to the idea of bringing in a provincial police force and doing away with the RCMP for local policing. Is any of this being done in coordination with those local governments, or is this strictly an MPF proposal?
Yeah, we've spoke over the last 12 months, give or take. We've actually spoke with numerous municipal leaders, mayors and councils, reeves, that sort of thing. And a lot of them are showing up to these engagement sessions as well. Not a single one of those municipalities that we've talked to have told us that they think this is a good idea. Most of them, if not actually all of them, I should say, kind of have the same opinion that we do, is that the prospect of moving to a provincial police force does not make sense. And they're concerned that they will lose the RCMP, which is a police force that they, for lack of better words, are very supportive of and they want to keep. And they're concerned that the government may, for lack of better words, keep plodding down this path without really listening to their concerns on it.
Yeah, so even though the province is proposing to do away with the RCMP for local policing, there would still be a role for the RCMP to play in Alberta. Right now, there are national joint initiatives, things like terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking. So even if the Alberta government did away with the RCMP for local policing in Alberta, there would still be a presence here. So what is the concern from the NFP with the change in local policing to a provincial police force?
Well, there would likely still be a presence, although that presence would be much, much smaller, and it would likely revolve only around federal policing, which we're talking a few hundred people left, as opposed to 3,500 members that we have now. So a drastic decrease in number of RCMP officers that you would see in the province. And when I say see, you probably wouldn't even recognize them because they're working on federal plainclothes sections and whatnot. You wouldn't even know that they were there if all we were left was the federal bodies. It's concerning. It is concerning for us. Like I said, we represent about 3,500 of the RCMP members in the province of Alberta. They have a strong desire to remain in Alberta, as do the communities they serve. We have conducted 3 rounds of polling now, and give or take a percentage point or two, depending on which corner of the province we're talking about. The support for keeping the RCMP is right around that 80% mark. So there's huge support to keep the RCMP in Alberta, and as a result of getting back to the previous question. It leaves the municipalities and anybody that's coming to these sessions and anybody that we've talked to really asking why. It just doesn't make sense.
Are there any of these issues that are being raised by Albertans at these town halls, or what are the key issues that you're hearing? Is it rural crime? Is it property crime? Is it response times? What are the issues that Albertans are bringing forward at these town halls?
Yeah, the biggest issue that we hear time and time again is more as it relates to the revolving door of the criminal justice system in Alberta. It's not unusual for the members to arrest and charge a person and then quickly be released on either on bail or without bail, or dealt with and released and back into the public to undoubtedly and unfortunately reoffend again. And that frustrates people very, very, very much so. So that's the overarching theme. But the people that have been talking to, they understand that it's not just one magic pill that fixes all of it. It's it's a little bit of lever A, a little bit of lever B to get to where we need to be.
Now, there have been a couple incidents in Alberta in recent years that have kind of, I don't want to say damaged, but have dinged up the perception of the RCMP in some quarters of southern Alberta. And the key incidents I'm thinking of are the seizure of guns from homes in High River after the floods in 2013, and then the arrest of Eddie Maurice, who was charged after an incident involving intruders on his property south of Calgary. And I know the choice to charge or drop charges is a matter for the Crown, but as I recall, his arrest even sparked some outrage in some corners of rural Alberta that are maybe more pro-gun, more pro-property rights. And I'm just wondering how the NPF feels the perception is of the RCMP in some of these quarters in Alberta.
Those are all valid points, Dave. The issue is that our members, and I would venture to say no police officer anywhere, should be put in a position where they get to pick and choose the charges they lay or the arrests they make. I'm not sure if it would be much good to society where we have members that are deciding which laws they're going to enforce and which laws they aren't based on their own personal opinion. The firearms issues in High River, those were all seized for public safety reasons. That community at the time was not completely locked down. There was still people inside the community. And when our members, in those cases, were going door to door checking for people that were in need of help, and they found many that were in need of help, I might add. Mm-hmm. Quite often they were going through the doors and they were finding guns laying right there in the open where it could be a danger to anyone, with children, for example, because there was children left in that community still that were stumbled in and could find a lot of weapons at their disposal, and they were only seized for safekeeping. Every single one of them was returned to their owner. There were no charges laid at all. And I think from talking to the people of the community after, I think in regards to the gun bit and why they were left at the door was for a couple of reasons. One, the water was coming up so high that and so fast that they got as far as the door and then bailed and left them laying there. And in some cases, they would bring them from the basement up to the main floor where it'd be dry, and then then bailed out of the house, for their own safety, and rightfully so. And so those guns were only seized for public safety, and every single one of them was returned. There was no charges laid at all on those. It was spun a little bit differently in the media, but that's the facts of it. As far as the charges that members lay, I don't think it would be very good for society if the police officers were able to decide which laws they did and didn't enforce. I don't think that'd be any good for anyone. We are members and police officers in general across not just Canada but North America. They're sworn to uphold the law, and that's all the laws, whether they like them or not.
Now, what has the government's response been to these concerns? Has the NPF had a chance to meet with the minister or even someone in the Premier's office to raise some of the concerns you have about doing away with the RCMP in Alberta?
Well, for the vast majority, Dave, it's been crickets from the provincial government, unfortunately. We have met with many MLAs from all parties. Some are out, some, as you can imagine, are a little bit more vocal in their support, and others, depending on the color of the banner, are a little bit more reserved. But they know that this is a concern for us and for Albertans, and I can only hope that they're paying attention to what the people of Alberta want.
All right, Kevin Halwa, National Police Federation. Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome, Dave. Have a good day.
Joining me now is Alberta Party leader Barry Morishita. Barry, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for the interest, Dave. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. So, Barry, I know you're newly elected to the Alberta Party leadership. Prior to that, you served as mayor of Brooks. You also headed up the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association.
Yep.
So you have some experience dealing with the RCMP and dealing with the RCMP file. What do you make of the relationship between the RCMP and smaller municipalities in Alberta?
Well, I think it's evolving. When I was president of AUMA, one of the things I did was I toured all the municipal members over a 4-year period. And I can say clearly that at the beginning of that, one of the questions that always came up was, what is your relationship with the detachment commander? How is the service level? How are things going? And I can safely say that over a period of those 4 years, it certainly improved. I think the leadership here at the K Division and in Alberta have come a long ways to becoming more integrated into the communities, and we formed a really good relationship at that point where I passed on good things, but I also passed on people that weren't satisfied, and I think they've made good efforts there. So it's not perfect, and none of those situations are, but I think it's improving, and I think we're on the right track.
So what was your reaction when you first heard that as part of this whole fair deal panel, the Alberta government was looking at potentially doing away with the RCMP? It's an idea that's been battered around for decades here in Alberta, but that they were looking at doing away with the RCMP for municipal policing and instituting a provincial police force.
Disappointed in the sense that I didn't quite understand why. And I went to one fair deal meeting in Fort Saskatchewan, I believe. I was at it. Never really came up there, but it did come up at others. I don't doubt that, but I'm curious as to why. There's no doubt we had rural crime issues. We also had a downturn in the economy. All of those things are linked with crime itself is a product of other issues as well. And I don't think that we had a very good handle on it, in that 2015, 2016, 2017 time period. So we certainly saw rural crime rates getting to levels that were unacceptable. So it became an issue. I think we do have to go back to why do we need a provincial police force when we already have the RCMP doing community policing? And that should have been the conversation around to start with. But every conversation we were at after that was quite disappointing in the sense that, we weren't talking about do we need to do it. The first conversations we had with the provincial government were about transition. So it's almost like we've decided anyway, regardless of what you think, and we're going to move forward, which was disappointing because I think there's a lot of things left on the table. You don't have to blow up the whole system to make it better.
Do you feel like Premier Jason Kenney and the UCP government were potentially tapping into a group of not municipalities or municipal governments who may have been satisfied with the RCMP, but people who were dissatisfied with either the relationship between the RCMP and the community, or even just the way that the RCMP was managing the rural crime situation. You hear cases like Eddie Maurice, who gets arrested for engaging with trespassers on his property. You hear cases like in High River after the 2013 flooding, where the RCMP went into people's houses and confiscated firearms. That upset. There's kind of a sentiment of the idea of protecting one's own property in Alberta that seems maybe a little stronger than elsewhere. Do you feel like the provincial government is really aiming this move at those people who are upset with the RCMP? And how big of a group do you feel that is?
So first of all, I think on that specific question of the group size, I think there's, you can't satisfy everybody. That's an impossible thing. And I do believe that this is more about Alberta's relationship with Ottawa than the RCMP's relationship with the community and the policing that happens here. So in the cases you cited, let me roll back a little bit. The K Division in charge here does Alberta's policing. We've heard a lot of misinformation about how Ottawa's priorities are imposed on the RCMP in Brooks. That's not true. The fact is that the RCMP detachment in Brooks, the members assigned to Brooks, the ones that we pay for, are in fact providing policing for our area. There is an entirely different, there are federal initiatives that are undertaken by federal officers across this country, let's be clear. So I don't think that that happens. I think they are very reflective of what's happening in Alberta. When it came out of the Fair Deal panel, I think, it was that the whole premise was a better deal for Alberta relative to Ottawa. And I think that was the misconception that exists, is that somehow the K Division commander is beholden to Ottawa's priorities, when that has not been my experience. My experience has been the commander here in Alberta reflects Alberta's policing priorities, and I think that's what's happening. Again, it's not perfect. It needs to be worked on all the time, but I really do fail to understand the linkage between the people that provide that community policing and other issues. They enforce the law as they are directed to do by their contracts, and their contracts are clearly about Alberta policing and Alberta priorities.
Yeah. Now, looking at the public support or disapproval of the idea of an Alberta provincial police force, we've seen people responding to the government's own surveys saying that they don't see the need to get rid of the RCMP. We've seen the National Policing Federation put out polling that says Albertans generally support the RCMP. And then you factor in on top of that the several $100 million in startup costs to get this going. Do you get the sense that those could be roadblocks to the government going ahead with this? Or do you feel that, there's a concern that the government will say, well, we know that some people don't like the idea. We know that there's a lot of money at stake, but we feel it's important to lay claim to this notion.
Well, it's not like they haven't done things in the past that Albertans weren't interested in, and which is disappointing in itself. The government's elected by people who want their values and their wishes reflected in their leadership, in their representatives. And when in our municipal polling, when we did our Leaders President Summit on Policing, we had well over 85% of the municipalities support the RCMP. But this government has not always listened in that regard. Curriculum is another one where we have overwhelming opposition to it, yet we can't step back and say, okay, maybe we're not in line with what Albertans are looking for. The government has to be in line with what Albertans are looking for. And on this file, they're not. And if that's not enough, we have the extra costs at a time when the province claims we don't have any money. So now we're talking about imposing something Albertans don't want at an extra cost that we apparently can't afford. the entire thing makes no sense, should be stopped. We have other issues to deal with, and the RCMP replacement of the provincial policeman certainly isn't a top priority for Albertans, and therefore it shouldn't be for the government.
Mm-hmm. And last question for you. You know, amidst all this, we have the Justice Minister and Solicitor General, Casey Madhu, essentially being pushed aside while the province investigates whether or not he, you know, improperly made a phone call to Edmonton's police chief after he received a distracted driving ticket. Does the fact that the Justice Minister kind of isn't in the chair right now and may not be down the road, you know, does that muddy the process at all, that maybe the government needs to step back from it? Or do you get a sense that, you know, once this is dealt with, they'll just keep pushing forward with it?
I don't know what their thinking is. I know the previous minister was very much just wanted a provincial police force no matter what. And I don't think that was proper. I hope this allows them to maybe take a step back and reconsider the direction they're going. That would be really actually very beneficial for Alberta to do that. All of the things that are going on in terms of and I guess this is what it comes down to, which is the most disappointing thing. The politics of this are unnecessary. And what we should be concentrating on is how to make policing better at a local level, how to improve safety for residents of Alberta, how to make people feel that their priorities are being addressed. And that's, if we spent as much time and effort on that as we have in studying to get a provincial police force, we'd be miles ahead. And, you know, my leadership and the Alberta Party would certainly be looking at that direction versus this. This seems to be a political exercise with some outcome I'm not quite sure of. It's very disappointing. Doesn't need to happen and should be stopped immediately. Period.
And with that, we'll leave it there. Barry Morishita, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dave.
And that's it for this edition of Under the Dome. Don't forget, you can find all past episodes at edmontonjournal.com/underthedome, or you can hit that subscribe button on YouTube. I'm Dave Breakenridge. We'll see you next time.